Let me tell you something strange about silence in the digital age. We live in a world where almost everything is shared. Birthdays, coffee cups, sunsets, tears, laughter, even pain dressed up with filters. Yet some people stay completely invisible. They scroll quietly, observe deeply, but rarely, if ever, post. You might even know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. And here's the question that always lingers in people's minds. Why? Why would someone choose to stay unseen when the whole world seems to be shouting for attention? It's easy to assume that people who don't post are simply shy or introverted, but that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play, one that speaks volumes about human nature, self-perception, and the quiet rebellion against a culture obsessed with visibility. See, for some people, silence is not emptiness. It's control. It's the power to choose what the world doesn't get to know. Because whether we admit it or not, social media has subtly reshaped how we define ourselves. It rewards display. It praises noise. And yet, those who stay in the shadows are often the ones who see everything most clearly. They watch without needing to interrupt. They think before reacting. They analyze before judging. Psychologists have found something fascinating. People who refrain from posting frequently often score higher on traits like self-restraint, introspection, and emotional independence. They tend to be less influenced by social comparison and external validation. In other words, they aren't trying to prove who they are. They're trying to understand it. And in a world drowning in performances, that's rare. Because let's be honest, most of what we post is not just communication. It's identity crafting. It's an unconscious audition for belonging. Every caption, every photo, every status update says, "This is who I am? Do you approve?" But when you stop posting, something shifts. You begin to detach your worth from digital applause. You stop thinking in captions. You start experiencing moments for yourself again instead of for a lens. And that's the secret psychology behind many people who don't post. They crave authenticity in a space where everything feels staged. They don't hate social media. They just can't find themselves in it anymore. It's not about being anti-technology or anti-social. It's about refusing to reduce your life into highlights. Because when you've seen how easy it is to manipulate perception, you start valuing what can't be posted. Silence, depth, imperfection, truth. For some, the decision not to post comes after a kind of emotional burnout. Maybe they once did share everything until one day it stopped feeling real. They realized that every time they shared something beautiful, they felt an invisible pressure to keep outdoing it. They weren't living anymore. They were performing. So they quit quietly. No announcement, just a slow disappearance from the feed. But here's what's often misunderstood. Not posting doesn't mean not feeling. It doesn't mean they don't care. It often means they care too much about presence, about meaning, about protecting what's sacred. There's a concept in psychology called psychological ownership. It's the feeling that something belongs deeply to you. A thought, a memory, an experience. And when you post it, that sense of ownership fades just a little. The moment becomes shared property, open to judgment, misinterpretation, even mockery. So people who don't post are often guarding their sense of ownership over life itself. They keep their moments untouchable, private, pure. And maybe that's not sadness or withdrawal. Maybe it's a quiet kind of freedom. Because think about it. When was the last time you did something meaningful and didn't feel the urge to share it? When was the last time you laughed, cried, or achieved something and didn't immediately think of posting it online? That reflex, that need to display, is not natural. It's conditioned. It's the product of a decade of likes, shares, and dopamine loops training our brains to equate validation with value. And when someone steps outside that system, it can feel like rebellion. But it's also healing. They start rediscovering the simplicity of doing things for themselves again. Cooking without photographing it, traveling without tagging it, feeling without explaining it. In that space, something awakens. A kind of self-awareness that doesn't need an audience. But not everyone who doesn't post is doing it from a place of peace. Some are driven by fear, the fear of judgment, rejection, or being misunderstood. Social media has amplified a subtle form of anxiety psychologists call self-presentational pressure. It's the constant awareness that you're being watched even when you're not. And for many, that's exhausting. They worry that what they say might be misread or worse, ignored. So they retreat, not because they don't want to connect, but because the cost of visibility feels too high. They want to be seen, but only truly, not superficially. And ironically, sometimes the quietest people online have the loudest thoughts in their minds. They're not absent, they're overflowing. They just choose stillness instead of spectacle. There's a deep philosophical undertone to that silence. In a world that constantly says, "Look at me," choosing invisibility becomes a form of self-definition. It's saying, "I exist beyond your perception." They might scroll through others' lives, nodding, smiling, sometimes aching, but they rarely project because they understand something most don't. Not everything you experience is meant to be witnessed. Sometimes the most profound things in life, growth, grief, transformation, happen quietly, unseen, unposted. And when you've lived through enough of those private transformations, you start realizing that being unseen is not the same as being insignificant. It's actually where identity is formed, not performed. This is where the paradox lies. Social media was designed to connect us, yet it often leaves people feeling more isolated than ever. When you don't post, you stop chasing digital closeness and start rebuilding real ones. You begin noticing who checks in on you without the need for updates. You learn who remembers you without reminders. That kind of connection, raw, unbroadcasted, feels heavier, warmer, and infinitely more real. And the people who don't post, they live in that space. They build relationships that don't need proof. They find comfort in the unshared moment, and they let life unfold without turning it into content. Part of this is also about identity security, knowing who you are even when nobody's watching. When you're comfortable in your own company, you don't need an audience to validate your worth. That's not arrogance, it's peace. And ironically, the same people who don't post often have the most interesting stories to tell, but they save them for when you're sitting across the table, not across the screen. Because real connection to them isn't measured in comments or likes. It's in shared silence, in eyes meeting, in laughter that doesn't need witnesses. These are the people who carry worlds within them, who process deeply, observe constantly, and understand quietly. They don't need the world to applaud their existence. They just need to live it. And maybe, just maybe, in a world so desperate to be seen, their silence isn't a flaw. It's a mirror. A reminder that not everything meaningful has to be shared, that sometimes the most human thing you can do is to keep something entirely for yourself. You know what's fascinating? The longer someone stays off social media, the more they begin to see the world differently. Colors look richer, time feels slower, conversations feel fuller. It's as if stepping away from the noise makes everything real again. Because when you stop performing, you start experiencing. There's a quiet beauty in walking through life without needing proof of every step. You're not thinking about angles or lighting or captions. You're just there, fully alive, inside the moment instead of outside it. And that's something social media rarely lets us do anymore. But the psychology behind this goes deeper than preference or taste. It's rooted in how our brains process validation. Every time we post something online and it gets attention, likes, comments, hearts, our brain releases dopamine, the same chemical involved in reward and addiction. Over time, we begin to crave that validation. We start thinking in terms of shareable experiences instead of real ones. Now, imagine someone who resists that loop, someone who deliberately chooses to disconnect from the dopamine cycle. That's not disinterest, that's discipline. It takes self-awareness to resist something designed to keep you hooked. People who don't post often have a strong internal locus of control, a psychological term meaning their sense of worth and happiness comes from within, not from external approval. They don't need the digital echo of "you're enough" to believe it. And here's what's even more interesting. Studies show that people who take long breaks from posting or consuming social media content often experience a measurable increase in emotional stability and life satisfaction. Because when your sense of identity is no longer being constantly mirrored back to you, it becomes solid. It becomes real. You're no longer editing your life into something digestible. You're living it in all its messy, beautiful, unfiltered complexity. And maybe that's the real rebellion, to stay whole in a world that rewards fragments. But silence online doesn't always mean serenity. Sometimes it hides exhaustion. For many, social media became a place where they once sought connection but ended up feeling drained. There's a subtle emotional fatigue that comes from witnessing everyone's highlight reels while you're still trying to piece together your own behind the scenes. You start comparing even when you don't mean to. You start questioning your worth even when you know better. And eventually, some people decide to step away, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. They realize they don't owe the world a performance. They don't owe an explanation for their silence. And they don't need to keep proving they're happy just to be believed. That's one of the quiet truths of this generation. We've confused visibility with value. We assume that to matter, we must be noticed. But real meaning doesn't need witnesses. Some of the most meaningful moments of your life, the ones that shape who you are, will happen without a single person watching. No cameras, no captions, no audience. Just you. And maybe that's what those who don't post understand best. They know that privacy is not loneliness. It's intimacy with yourself. Because when you stop broadcasting every thought, you start hearing your own again. You start reconnecting with the parts of you that got lost in the noise. Your quiet desires, your unspoken fears, your inner compass. And that's something profoundly spiritual in today's world. It's not a withdrawal, it's a homecoming. Of course, it's not always peaceful. There are moments of doubt, of wondering if silence makes you invisible, if you're falling behind while everyone else is performing progress. But with time, you start noticing something beautiful. Your worth doesn't disappear when nobody's looking. It's still there, steady, like the hum of a quiet room after a storm. And maybe that's what real confidence looks like. Not the loud declaration of self online, but the calm assurance of self offline. Some people say, with a wink of digital irony, if you didn't post it, did it even happen? It's a question meant to be playful, yet it carries the unsettling weight of our time, subtly reinforcing the notion that experiences require an audience to be legitimized. But the profound, unassailable truth is that the things which truly shape you, that carve the deepest grooves into your character and etch themselves onto your soul, are almost never the things that make it to the feed. The slow, painful, and beautiful process of your growth, the late-night realizations that change your entire trajectory, the small, accumulated acts of courage that no one ever witnesses. These are the quiet revolutions of the self. Your most defining heartbreaks are often not the dramatic, narratable endings, but the private, silent shatterings of hope that you hold close, too tender for the glare of a timeline. Your most significant victories are the ones fought in the silent arenas of your own mind. Overcoming a private fear, finally forgiving yourself, choosing kindness in the face of pettiness. These triumphs lose none of their power in their secrecy. In fact, they are often purified by it. And what of the quiet, unobserved acts of kindness? The helping hand offered without a camera, the generous words spoken in private, the patient listening that asks for nothing in return. These moments, uncommodified and unbroadcasted, become the bedrock of your moral character. They live and breathe not in the ephemeral space of a server farm, but in the sacred, enduring vault of memory and in the subtle alteration of your own spirit. They become part of the unspoken truth of who you are. And maybe, when you truly consider the depth and richness of this unrecorded life, that is enough. More than enough. It is everything. This concept finds a powerful echo in psychology. When experts discuss authentic self-expression, they place paramount importance on the idea of congruence, the harmonious alignment between your inner reality, your true feelings and values, and the outer self you present to the world. This alignment is the bedrock of psychological integrity. It is the feeling of being whole, undivided, and genuine. But in the age of filters, both literal and metaphorical, this delicate alignment is constantly, insidiously distorted. The architecture of social platforms, built on the currency of approval, incentivizes a performance. You begin, often unconsciously, to curate a version of yourself designed for maximum engagement. A highlight reel that slowly estranges you from your own unvarnished reality. The gap between who you are in the quiet of your own company and who you are in the digital sphere widens, creating a low-grade psychic dissonance, a feeling of being a stranger in your own story. So, when someone makes the conscious, deliberate choice not to post, it is far more than a simple rejection of a platform. It might be their most powerful act of personal integrity. It is their way of staunchly defending that fragile bridge between their inner and outer world, of preserving congruence. It is a declaration that their lived experience is valid and complete in and of itself, without the need for external certification. They are making a stand for a fundamental truth, that reality is not contingent upon documentation. These individuals operate from a place of profound self-validation. They do not need a chorus of comments to confirm that their joy was real or that their grief was profound. The feeling itself, the warmth of the sun on their skin, the sting of tears, the swell of pride, is its own irrefutable evidence. They understand, on a visceral level, that the impulse to capture every sunset is often an impulse to step outside the moment, to become its publicist rather than its participant. They know that the most vivid and lasting memories are not those viewed through a screen or framed for composition, but those absorbed directly through the senses, felt fully in the heart, and imprinted on the memory without a digital intermediary. By choosing to live fully and quietly, they are not living less. They are, in many ways, living more. They are reclaiming their attention, their experiences, and their very identities from the performative loop. They are choosing to inhabit their lives so completely that the thought of pausing to package it for consumption becomes an interruption to the sacred act of living itself. In their silence, they are not absent from their lives. They are profoundly, authentically present within them, authoring a rich and meaningful narrative that is written not in captions, but in the quiet, steady accumulation of unlived, unposted, and deeply felt moments. And here's the paradox. Those who live quietly often feel life most intensely. They are the keenest observers in a world of performers, the ones who absorb the symphony of details that others, in their rush to broadcast, simply miss. They notice the way the afternoon light changes on a wall, transforming plain paint into a canvas of fleeting gold. They hear the subtle, telling pause before someone speaks, a silence heavy with unvoiced thought or emotion. They cherish the sound of distant, anonymous laughter floating from an open window, a reminder of joy that exists independently of their own. They are profoundly present, and this quality of deep presence is the rarest, most valuable currency in an economy built on fleeting attention. But sometimes, this very richness of inner life leads to their being misunderstood. From the outside, their stillness can be misread as detachment, their depth mistaken for mystery, and their contentment perceived as coldness. A world accustomed to constant noise often interprets silence as a void, rather than recognizing it as a space filled with its own intricate substance. Yet, if you look closer, if you have the patience to see beyond the initial impression, you will find that their silence is not an emptiness to be filled, but a depth to be respected. It is the calm that descends when a person no longer feels the frantic need to explain themselves in order to be understood. It is the quiet confidence that blossoms from the realization that one does not need to be known by everyone, but rather deeply understood by the few who truly matter. This is the wisdom that people who don't post understand best. They have drawn a sacred boundary around their inner world. They know, with a certainty that guides their choices, that not every truth is meant for the crowd, that some feelings are too fragile, some joys too personal, and some sorrows too sacred to be subjected to the public gaze. They believe that certain parts of the soul deserve to remain untouched by algorithms, untainted by trending opinions, and unburdened by the weight of external judgment. Because once a moment, a memory, or a piece of your heart becomes public property, it ceases to be purely yours. It is no longer just your experience. It becomes a commodity for interpretation, a subject for judgment, a potential pawn in the game of social trends. And perhaps, some moments are simply too sacred for that fate. They are the unedited, unshared, and uncommodified fragments of a life, the very things that make it authentically, uniquely yours. So the next time you notice someone who never posts, resist the easy assumption that they are hiding or disengaged. The truth is far more profound. Maybe they are not withdrawing from life, but diving into it more fully. Maybe they have discovered a profound peace in the quiet corners of existence. The space is not illuminated by the blue glow of a screen, but by the warm, steady light of genuine experience. Maybe they are the ones who have remembered a fundamental truth that the rest of us, in our clamor for visibility, have forgotten. That being unseen does not equate to being alone, that a quiet demeanor does not signal an empty mind or heart, and that sometimes the most powerful and truest expression of who you are is not found in a curated post or a clever caption, but in the dignified, beautiful silence of a life being lived for its own sake, not for an audience. Because in the end, we were not meant to be perpetual performances, editing our realities for public consumption. We were meant to be people, complex, messy, and whole. And the people who don't post, in their quiet, unfiltered, and beautifully invisible way, gently remind us of that essential truth with every day they choose to live for themselves.